The following is a clip from my video on integral religion and spirituality. Link in the description.
I'm trying to get you to see the problems of the early and mid-stage approaches to integration and get you to think about what a healthy, holistic approach to integration might be and the pitfalls that we need to avoid to be able to achieve it. Some kind of a healthy and skillful integration without getting caught in the clusterfuck or the conflation. So that's totally possible. These are just the potential extreme problems that we see with integration. It's not going to be like the buffet style, new agey, like pick and choose what you like kind of thing. And it's also not going to be this kind of conflation where you take everything that looks kind of similar and ultimately really reduce it down to the way that you see it, trying to collapse all the mountaintops into the mountaintop that you like. These are the early personal post-formal versions of integration. It starts off with early vision logic, then mid-vision logic, and there's also a late-stage vision logic. These are kind of the two forms of unskillful integration that we want to separate ourselves from. We want to integrate diversity with discernment. We want to take a big picture view. We want to do a meta-analysis of all the traditions, favoring none, looking for the universal themes and how they appear in the different personal and cultural costumes, understanding that there are going to be different translations of experience from different levels of development, and knowing how to understand these symbols in their historical and cultural context, as well as a contemporary cultural and personal, how does this apply to me in my life, and maybe a more general universal interpretation of archetypes and symbolism, and to be able to look at all of these levels and not conflate them and understand how to do that skillfully. Understanding ideas in an unfolding context is super important to skillful integration. Okay. I see we got some heaven here. Some reincarnation. That looks nice. I like the look of this aura chakra combination. That's good. What is that? Crystals? Yeah, okay. Astrology, not so much for me. I'm more of an Enneagram person. Oh, you know what would really decalcify my pineal gland right now, really lube my third eye? I really need to find some of that Merkaba, some of that sacred geometry, some of that flower of life stuff. Maybe I can figure out the secret, can manifest that somehow in this buffet. Are we fresh out of the quantum physics and the channeling and the psychics and the astral projection? We don't want this buffet style approach to religion. I might fill up on the UFOs though if we don't hurry. The problem is it's incoherent, it's inconsistent with itself, it's self-contradictory, it's a bad integration of religion, it's out of touch with reality, it doesn't even make sense. So if it wasn't a bad integration, if it wasn't inconsistent with itself, and if it wasn't out of touch with reality, it wouldn't be such a big problem. A great example of conflation, ancient aliens. Oh, the Bible? Aliens. These ruins we found? Aliens. Everything comes back to aliens. And we see other people doing this too in the integral spaces, like Steve McIntosh basically does that same thing where he's like, oh, we're integral, we all agree about integral, but really it's about God, and I want to make room for this belief in a personal God and call that integral. And it happens with Buddhism too. You have people like Ken Wilber who are kind of familiar with all of the distinctions and the traditions, but really it's about Buddhism. Let me give an example. Some of you have seen this book, The Religion of Tomorrow. He reduces religion to the great traditions because it's easier for him to act like at the end of the day they're all talking about Buddhism and his worldview. Whereas things like paganism and some of these other traditions can't be so easily conflated into Buddhism. Look at this chart where he's got this circle of the great traditions, right? And he's comparing the inner and outer reality. Look what he does. Just like I'm saying, he's conflating them. For Christianity, you have Godhead, and then over here you have Brahman. Christianity is this creator of the world from the outside, and Buddhism has God on the inside becoming the world. These are completely different concepts of what God is, and yet he's saying, oh look, they're all saying the same thing, but they're not. He's acting like they're all saying the same thing, and then reducing it all back down to his worldview, like they're all justifying his worldview. Again, this is an unhealthy bias integration. And then you ultimately still do end up favoring one worldview, which is not integral.
Nobody with any intelligence says that the religions are exactly the same. I mean, clearly Muslims go on the Hajj to Mecca and Christians don't go on the Hajj to Mecca, and Muslims don't follow the 7 sacraments of Catholicism, nor do they follow the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. So clearly there are differences across religions, and that isn't the question. The question is whether those differences matter, whether those differences are, as many say, inessential or inconsequential. And I frankly think it's condescending to say, oh, well, the Hajj doesn't really matter. Tell a Muslim that. Like, how can it not matter? It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, or the 5 prayers a day that Muslims insist on, also as part of the 5 pillars of Islam. What's inconsequential or inessential about that? What always happens when people want to push the great religions into one box, into one mountaintop, right, rather than many mountaintops, is you come up with your own ad hoc idea of what the mountaintop is, right? Oops, it just happens to be my vision of what religion should be, right? So maybe ultimately there's one God who maybe sounds and talks and walks a lot like Jesus. Or, maybe it's the mystical experience, which just happens to be the piece of religion that you value. Or maybe it's compassion, which just happens to be your particular preoccupation with what the religion should be doing. But in any case, it's you. If basically Taoism is essentially the same as Christianity, well, what is there to learn from studying Taoism? What's the difference between a Taoist in China and a Christian here in Washington, D.C.? And I want to be able to hear what the Confucians say, what the Taoists say, what the Buddhists say, what the Jews say about what religion is. And that's what I try to do.
It makes sense that after you first deconstructed your worldview, be it traditional or modern or both, that the cutting edge for you would be to take into account all these new perspectives. For the first time, you're really free and you're able to explore all of these new traditions and really sample to know what is good and true about each one of them. And if you're really starting to see, wow, there's good stuff in all these things, this is the beginning of healthy integration. So I'm not just saying that it's a problem to be here or it's a problem to be there, but realize that it's not the end. It's not the final stage. There's a higher stage of integration yet. Don't get stuck. These are just the extreme ways that it goes wrong. It doesn't have to go wrong in these kinds of ways. Often people move through these stages and don't go to these extremes. For example, people who are raised in more traditional families who take the time to really deconstruct those traditions and learn about rationality might not be so quick to try and collapse everything down at the buffet. They can be in the buffet with their sword in hand, sampling things, learning about the pros and cons, and then maybe making their way to some kind of a healthy and skillful integration without getting caught in the clusterfuck or the conflation. So that's totally possible. These are just the potential extreme problems that we see with integration. So figuring out how to be in touch with reality, figuring out how to integrate all the systems in a coherent way that's not superstitious, again, that's in touch with reality in a coherent and consistent way that doesn't favor one tradition. These are the problems with personal integration. But if you actually took on the project of trying to, with integrity, with intellectual honesty, in a way that you could actually justify it, create a system for the future where people were going to hold you accountable for the ways that you might potentially have personal bias. This is going to help you in your own development to really examine some of these things that you might have taken for granted and to really take a good hard look and to question some of these things, to try to wring personal bias out of your integration to actually get to a skillful, holistic, and pure integration minus your own personal issues. So we definitely want to avoid the conflation and the clusterfuck and have some healthy integration. So some of the problems I'm seeing here are maybe there's a bit of a premature development. Maybe you learned about integral a little bit too soon and you didn't really deconstruct some of your old traditions. You still have some pre-trans confusion and a lack of construct awareness. Like maybe you don't really understand the relative nature of symbolism. Maybe you haven't really brought rationality and the sword online. Maybe you're not really that skeptical. You're kind of still bathing a little bit too much in the green woo and sort of found your way into an integral landscape and heard Ken Wilber tell you were integral and now you think you're integral too because you think that integral is the same as some of this new age stuff that you heard people talking about. Sounds kind of similar, so you probably think that you're already integral. These are the main problems that we still see in the integral space. And a lot of it has to do with a lack of construct awareness and an overglorification of personal experience, a demonization of science and rationality, and major pre-trans confusion, bad integration in terms of being able to have a fair approach. At this next stage of development, think about religion not just as your own personal project, but what it would be like to have a fair approach to integration for future generations. Think about the importance of being able to support our claims and to not seem like a cult and to not seem like some crazy, stupid superstition, to have a healthy and true integration. So we can have the best of all the traditions and get all the pros from all of these great traditions without over-glorifying any of them and without personal bias of integration. We can have a universal approach. Like and subscribe, ring the bell, all of that. Peace.